And we are back. 2 Kings chapter 23. The king acted immediately, assembling all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. Then the king proceeded to the temple of God, bringing everyone in his train, priests and prophets, and people ranging from the famous to the unknown. Then he read out publicly everything written in the book of the covenant that was found in the temple of God. The king stood by the pillar and before God solemnly committed them all to the covenant, to follow God believingly and obediently, to follow his instructions, heart and soul, on what to believe and do, to put into practice the entire covenant. All that was written in the book, the people stood in affirmation. Their commitment was unanimous. Then the king ordered Hilkiah the high priest, his associate priest, and the temple sentries to clean house, to get rid of everything in the temple of God that had been made for worshiping Baal and Asherah and the cosmic powers. He had them burned outside Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron, and then disposed of the ashes in Bethel. He fired the pagan priests whom the kings of Judah had hired to supervise the local intermittent religion shrines in the towns of Judah and neighborhoods of Jerusalem. In a stroke, he swept the country clean of the polluting stench of the round-the-clock worship of Baal, sun and moon, stars, all the so-called cosmic powers. He took the obscene phallic Asherah pole from the temple of God to the valley of Kidron outside Jerusalem, burned it up, then ground up the ashes and scattered them in the cemetery. He tore out the rooms of the male sacred prostitutes that had been set up in the temple of God. Women also used these rooms for weavings for Asherah. He swept the outlying towns of Judah clean of priests and smashed the intermittent religion shrines where they worked their trade from one end of the country to the other, all the way from Jeba to Beersheba. He smashed the intermittent religion shrines that had been set up just to the left of the city gate for the private use of Joshua, the city mayor. Even though these intermittent religion priests did not defile the altar in the temple itself, they were part of the general priestly corruption and had to go. Then Josiah demolished the Topheth, the iron furnace griddle set up in the valley of Ben-Hinnom for sacrificing children in the fire. No longer could anyone burn son or daughter to the god Molech. He hauled off the horse statues honoring the sun god, and the kings of Judah had set up near the entrance to the temple. They were in the courtyard next to the office of Nathan Melech, the warden. He burned up the sun chariots as so much rubbish. The king smashed all the altars to smithereens, and the altar on the roof shrine of Ahaz, the various altars the kings of Judah had made. The altars of Manasseh that littered the courtyard of the temple, he smashed them all, pulverized the fragments, and scattered their dust in the valley of Kidron. The king proceeded to make a clean sweep of all the intermittent religion shrines that had proliferated east of Jerusalem on the south slope of Abomination Hill, the one Solomon, king of Israel, had built to the obscene Sidonian intimate goddess Ashtoreth. To Chemosh, the dirty old god of the Moabites, and to Milcom, the depraved god of the Ammonites. He tore apart the altars, chopped down the phallic Asherah poles, and scattered old bones over the sites. Next, he took care of the altar at the shrine in Bethel that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had built. The same Jeroboam who had led Israel into a life of sin. He tore apart the altar, burned down the shrine, leaving it in ashes, and then lit fire to the phallic Asherah pole. As Josiah looked over the scene, he noticed the tombs on the hillside. He ordered the bones removed from the tombs and had them cremated on the ruined altars, desacralizing the evil altars. This was a fulfillment of the word of God spoken by a holy man years before, when Jeroboam had stood by the altar at the sacred convocation. Then the king said, "And that memorial stone, whose is that?" The men from the city said, "That's a grave of the holy man who spoke the message against the altar at Bethel that you have just fulfilled." Josiah said, "Don't trouble his bones." So they left his bones undisturbed, along with the bones of the prophet from Samaria. But Josiah hadn't finished. He now moved through all the towns of Samaria, where the king of Israel had built neighborhood, intimate, and religion shrines that had so angered God. He tore the shrines down and left them in ruins, just as at Bethel. He killed all the priests who had conducted the sacrifices and cremated them on their own altars, thus desacralizing the altars. Only then did Josiah return to Jerusalem. The king now commanded the people, "Celebrate the Passover to God, your God, exactly as directed in this book of the covenant." This commanded Passover had not been celebrated since the days that the judges judged Israel. None of the king of Israel's and Judah had celebrated it. But in the 18th year of the rule of King Josiah, this very Passover was celebrated to God in Jerusalem. Josiah scrubbed the place clean and trashed spirit mediums, sorcerers, domestic gods, and carved figures, all the vast accumulation of foul and obscene relics and images on display everywhere you looked in Judah and Jerusalem. Josiah did this in obedience to the words of God's revelation written in the book that Hilkiah the priest found in the temple of God. There was no king to compare with Josiah, neither before nor after, a king who turned in total and repentant obedience to God, heart and mind and strength, following the instructions revealed to and written by Moses. The world would never again see a king like Josiah. But despite Josiah, God's hot anger did not cool. The raging anger ignited by Manasseh burned unchecked. And God, not swerving in his judgment, gave sentence, "I'll remove Judah from my presence in the same way I removed Israel. I'll turn my back on this city, Jerusalem, that I chose, and even from this temple of which I said my name lives here." The rest of the life and times of Josiah is written in the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. Josiah's death came about when Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, marched out to join forces with the king of Assyria at the Euphrates River. When King Josiah intercepted him at the plain of Megiddo, Necho killed him. Josiah's servant took his body in a chariot, returned him to Jerusalem, and buried him in his own tomb. By popular choice, Jehoahaz, son of Josiah, was anointed and succeeded his father as king. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he began to rule. He was king in Jerusalem for a mere 3 months. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Jeremiah. She came from Libnah. In God's opinion, he was an evil king, reverting to the evil ways of his ancestors. Pharaoh Necho captured Jehoahaz at Riblah in the country of Hamath and put him in chains, preventing him from ruling in Jerusalem. He demanded that Judah pay tribute of nearly 4 tons of silver and 75 pounds of gold. Then Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, son of Josiah, the successor to Josiah, but changed his name to Jehoiakim. Jehoahaz was carted off to Egypt and eventually died there. Meanwhile, Jehoiakim, like a good puppet, dutifully paid out the silver and gold demanded by Pharaoh. He scraped up the money by gouging the people, making everyone pay an assessed tax. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to rule. He was king for 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zebedah, daughter of Pedaiah. She had come from Rumah. In God's opinion, he was an evil king, picking up on the evil ways of his ancestors. 2 Kings chapter 24. It was during his reign that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invaded the country. Jehoiakim became his puppet, but after 3 years he had had enough and revolted. God dispatched a succession of raiding bands against him: Babylonian, Aramean, Moabite, and Ammonite. The strategy was to destroy Judah through the preaching of his servants and prophets. God had said he would do this, and now he was doing it. None of this was by chance. It was God's judgment as he turned his back on Judah because of the enormity of the sins of Manasseh. Manasseh, the killer king, who made the Jerusalem streets flow with the innocent blood of his victims. God wasn't about to overlook such crimes. The rest of the life and times of Jehoiakim is written in the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. Jehoiakim died and was buried with his ancestors. His son, Jehoiachin, became the next king. The threat from Egypt was now over. No more invasions by the king of Egypt. For by this time the king of Babylon had captured all the land between the brook of Egypt and the Euphrates River, land formerly controlled by the king of Egypt. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king. His rule in Jerusalem lasted only 3 months. His mother's name was Nehushta, daughter of Elnathan. She was from Jerusalem. In God's opinion, he also was an evil king, no different from his father. The next thing to happen was that the officers of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, attacked Jerusalem and put it under siege. While his officers were laying siege to the city, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, paid a personal visit, and Jehoiachin, king of Judah, along with his mother, officers, advisors, and government leaders, surrendered. In the 8th year of his reign, Jehoiachin was taken prisoner by the king of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar emptied the treasuries of both the temple of God and the royal palace, and confiscated all the gold furnishings that Solomon, king of Israel, had made for the temple of God. This should have been no surprise. God had said it would happen. And then he emptied Jerusalem of people, all its leaders and soldiers, all its craftsmen and artisans. He took them into exile, something like 10,000 of them. The only ones he left were the very poor. He took Jehoiachin into exile to Babylon. With him he took the king's mother, his wives, his chief officers, and community leaders, anyone who was anybody, in round numbers, 7,000 soldiers plus another 1,000 or so craftsmen and artisans, all herded off into exile in Babylon. Then the king of Babylon made Jehoiachin's uncle, Mattaniah, his puppet king, but changed his name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he started out as king. He was king of Jerusalem for 11 years. His mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah. Her hometown was Libnah. As far as God was concerned, Zedekiah was just one more evil king, a carbon copy of Jehoiakim. The source of all this doom to Jerusalem and Judah was God's anger. God turned his back on them as an act of judgment. And then Zedekiah revolted against the king of Babylon. 2 Kings chapter 25. The revolt dates from the 9th year and 10th month of Zedekiah's reign. Nebuchadnezzar set out for Jerusalem immediately with a full army. He set up camp and sealed off the city by building siege mounds around it. The city was under siege for 19 months, until the 11th year of Zedekiah. By the 4th month of Zedekiah's 11th year, on the 9th day of the month, the famine was so bad that there wasn't so much as a crumb of bread for anyone. Then there was a breakthrough. At night, under cover of darkness, the entire army escaped through an opening in the wall. It was the gate between the 2 walls above the king's garden. They slipped through the lines of the Babylonians who surrounded the city and headed for the Jordan on the Araba Valley Road. But the Babylonians were in pursuit of the king, and they caught up with him in the plains of Jericho. By then Zedekiah's army had deserted and was scattered. The Babylonians took Zedekiah prisoner and marched him off to the king of Babylon at Riblah. Then tried and sentenced him on the spot. Zedekiah's sons were executed right before his eyes. The summary murder of his sons was the last thing he saw, for they then blinded him. Securely handcuffed, he was hauled off to Babylon. In the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, on the 7th day of the 5th month, Nebuzaradan, the king of Babylon's chief deputy, arrived in Jerusalem. He burned the temple of God to the ground. went on to the royal palace and then finished off the city, burned the whole place down. He put the Babylonian troops he had with him to work knocking down the city walls. Finally, he rounded up everyone left in the city, including those who had earlier deserted to the king of Babylon, and took them off into exile. He left a few poor dirt farmers behind to tend the vineyards and what was left of the fields. The Babylonians broke up the bronze pillars, the bronze washstands, and the huge bronze basins, the sea, that were in the temple of God, and hauled the bronze off to Babylon. They also took the various bronze-crafted liturgical accessories used in the services of the temple worship, as well as the gold and silver censers and sprinkling bowls. The king's deputies didn't miss a thing. He took every scrap of precious metal he could find. The amount of bronze they got from the two pillars, the sea, and the wash basin, the washstands that Solomon had made for the temple of God were enormous. They couldn't weigh it all. Each pillar stood 27 feet high, plus another 4.5 feet for an ornate capital of bronze, filigree, and decorative fruit. The king's deputy took a number of special prisoners. Seraiah, the chief priest, Zephaniah, the associate priest, 3 wardens, the chief remaining army officer, 5 of the king's counselors, the accountant, the chief recruiting officer for the army, and 60 men of standing from among the people. Nebuzaradan, the king's deputy, marched them all off to the king of Babylon at Riblah. And there at Riblah, in the land of Hamath, the king of Babylon killed the lot of them in cold blood. Judah went into exile, orphaned from her land. Regarding the common people who were left behind in Judah, this Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, appointed Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, as their governor. When veteran army officers among the people heard that the king of Babylon had appointed Gedaliah, they came to Gedaliah at Mizpah. Among them were Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, Johanan, son of Kareah, Seraiah, son of Tanhumeth, the Netophathite, Jezaniah, the son of the Maacathite, and some of their followers. Gedaliah assured the officers and their men, giving them his word, "Don't be afraid of the Babylonian officials. Go back to your farms and families and respect the king of Babylon. Trust me, everything is going to be all right." Sometime later, it was in the 7th month, Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishama, he had royal blood in him, came back with 10 men and killed Gedaliah, the traitor Jews, and the Babylonian officials who were stationed at Mizpah, a bloody massacre. But then, afraid of what the Babylonians would do, they took off for Egypt, leaders and people, small and great. When Jehoiachin, king of Judah, had been exiled for 37 years, evil Merodach became king in Babylon and let Jehoiachin out of prison. This release took place on the 27th day of the 12th month. The king treated him most courteously and gave him preferential treatment beyond anything experienced by the other political prisoners held in Babylon. Jehoiachin took off his prison garb and for the rest of his life ate his meals in company with the king. The king provided everything he needed to live comfortably. Amen.
Amen.
And that is the end of 2 Kings.
Wow.
See you in
Next season.
the next season.